Welcome to Synister Stories. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from, and if it's late where you are. Turn the lights down. These stories are best heard in the dark. When I inherited my grandfather's farm, there was one rule everyone in the family knew. Never climb the ladder on the grain silo. I thought it was just another strange farm rule. Until the morning I found muddy footprints going all the way up the ladder, and none coming back down. The locked grain silo. The grain silo behind my grandfather's barn has been locked for over 40 years. A rusted metal ladder runs up the side of it to a small circular hatch at the very top. It was bolted into the metal decades ago, but over the years a few of the bolts have rusted out. The ladder still holds, but it's thin, loose, when the wind hits it just right. The whole thing rattles softly against the side of the silo. Growing up, everyone in the family knew the rule. Don't climb that ladder. My grandfather never explained why. He would just say it calmly whenever someone brought up the silo. Like it wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. When I was younger, I assumed it was just another one of those strange farm rules older people have. Farmers are full of them. Don't walk the fields after dark. Don't leave gates open. Don't mess with machinery you don't understand. The ladder rule just joined the list. The farm sits a few miles outside a small rural town, surrounded by cornfields and dirt roads that barely show up on maps. My family has owned it for generations. The barn is old but sturdy, with faded red boards and a roof that rattles slightly when the wind picks up. The farmhouse sits about 50 yards away, and behind the barn, standing alone near the edge of the field, is the silo. Tall, rusted, quiet. The ladder climbs all the way to the top hatch, but the bottom few rungs are wrapped in a thick chain, held shut with a heavy padlock. My grandfather put that chain there decades ago. As far as I know, nobody ever opened it. When he passed away last year, the farm was left to me. I moved back a few months later. I work remotely, so the quiet didn't bother me. Most days were simple: fixing fences, cleaning the barn, walking the property to see what needed work. For the first couple months, I barely thought about the silo. It just stood there behind the barn the way it always had. But about 2 weeks ago, something changed. It was early morning when I first noticed it. The sun had barely come up. The grass was still covered in dew. I was walking toward the barn to grab some tools when I looked over at the silo. Something about the ladder caught my attention. At first I couldn't tell what was wrong. Then I saw it. Mud. Dark brown mud smeared across the metal rungs. As I walked closer, I realized it wasn't random dirt. They were footprints, clear boot prints, pressed into the ladder. They started just above the chain and continued. All the way up, I stood there staring at them. The mud was still damp, clinging to the metal like it had just been tracked there. But the chain was still wrapped tight around the bottom rungs. The padlock was still closed. There was no way someone should have been able to climb past it. I crouched down to inspect it more closely. The chain hadn't been cut. The lock hadn't been forced. Everything looked exactly the same, except for the footprints. I convinced myself someone must have climbed it before I moved back, and I just never noticed. Maybe the rain had loosened old dirt and made the prints visible again. Even as I thought it. The explanation didn't feel right, but I left it alone. For the next few days, nothing happened. Then 3 nights later, I woke up to a sound outside. Metal hitting metal. Clang, clang, clang. The noise echoed faintly across the fields. It wasn't the wind, it was rhythmic. Clang, clang, clang. Like someone climbing. I rolled over and checked the time on my phone. 2:17 a.m. The sound continued for another 10 seconds, before stopping completely. The silence afterward felt worse than the noise itself. The next morning I walked out to check the silo. The ladder looked normal again. No mud, no footprints. Just the same rusted metal it had always been. If I hadn't seen the prints myself before, I would have thought I imagined the whole thing. That night I mounted one of my spare security cameras on the side of the barn. I angled it directly toward the silo ladder. If someone was climbing it, I wanted proof. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. No alerts, no movement. By the 3rd night, I was starting to feel stupid for worrying about it. Then the camera notification woke me up. Motion detected. I opened the camera feed on my phone. The view showed the back field dimly lit by the security light above the barn door. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the ladder moved. The thin metal frame shifted slightly against the side of the silo, the same way it sometimes rattles when strong wind hits it. Except there was no wind that night. One rung dipped, then another, like something heavy was stepping on them. But there was nothing there, no person, no shadow, just the ladder slowly bending under invisible weight as something climbed it, one rung at a time. The metal creaked softly with each step. I watched the screen in complete silence as the movement continued upward. Whatever was climbing reached the top. Then everything stopped. The camera feed stayed still for another 30 seconds before the motion alert ended. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The following evening, I decided I needed to check the silo myself. If someone was trespassing on the property, I couldn't just ignore it. Just before sunset, I grabbed a flashlight and walked out toward the back field. The silo stood exactly where it always had, silent, rusted, watching. When I reached the ladder, I noticed something immediately. The chain had shifted slightly. It was still locked, but there was just enough space between the rungs that someone could squeeze past it. I hesitated for a moment. Then I grabbed the ladder. The metal was cold under my hands. Each rung creaked quietly as I climbed. Halfway up, the ladder shifted slightly under my weight. The loose bolts made the metal frame groan against the silo wall. I paused and looked down. The farm stretched out around me in every direction. Empty fields, no lights, no movement, just wind brushing through the corn. When I reached the top, I lifted the hatch. Then I shined my flashlight inside. The silo looked mostly empty. Dust covered the metal floor. Small piles of old grain sat in the corners. But right in the center was something new. A mound of hay, stacked carefully, like a nest. I stared at it for several seconds. Then the hay shifted, just slightly, enough to make the dust move. Then I heard it, breathing slow, heavy, coming from somewhere in the darkness below me. The sound echoed against the metal walls. I leaned forward and shined the flashlight deeper inside. Something moved behind the hay. Not an animal, something bigger. I dropped the hatch and started climbing down the ladder as fast as I could. Halfway down, the metal above me creaked. A rung shifted. Then another, something inside the silo, had started climbing. I hit the ground, running. I didn't stop until I reached the house. That was 4 nights ago. I haven't gone near the silo since, but every morning when I look out across the back field, the muddy footprints are back on the ladder, starting just above the chain and going all the way up. The strange thing is, there are never any prints coming down. The scarecrow in the cornfield wasn't mine. I know that for a fact, because I planted that field myself, and I never built one. After my father passed away last year, my wife Emily and I moved back to the family farm. The house had been sitting empty for almost 2 years. It felt strange being back there at first. The place still smelled like my dad's coffee in the mornings. His boots were still by the back door. Even the old radio in the kitchen still picked up the same static-filled country station he used to listen to every night. Emily was the one who convinced me we should stay. She said the farm deserved to be lived in again. So that spring we started fixing things up. I repaired the fences. She cleaned out the house. And together we decided to bring the old cornfield back to life. The field sits behind the barn, about 200 yards from the house. When the corn grows tall, it almost looks like a green wall stretching across the back of the property. By early summer, the field looked healthy again. The rows were thick. The stalks were nearly shoulder height. And for the first time since my dad passed away, the place started to feel like a home again. Then one evening I noticed something standing in the middle of the field. At first I thought it was just a shadow. The sun was setting behind the trees, and the whole field was glowing orange. But as I kept looking, I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a scarecrow. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still between the rows. I remember frowning at it. Because there was one simple problem. I never built a scarecrow. I walked out there to check. The corn brushed against my arms as I pushed through the rows. By the time I reached it, the sun had almost disappeared behind the trees. Up close, it looked crude. A wooden post pushed into the dirt. A crossbeam nailed across the top for arms. An old flannel shirt hanging loosely from the wood, and a burlap sack tied around the top for a head. Someone had drawn a face on it with black marker, 2 uneven eyes, and a long, crooked smile. Something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't look like it was meant to scare birds. It looked like it was meant to watch. That night I told Emily about it while we were eating dinner. She laughed at first, said maybe one of the neighbors was trying to help us keep birds out of the corn. But when I told her none of the neighbors were close enough to walk over, she stopped smiling. "Did someone come onto the property?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, and that answer bothered both of us. The next morning I went out to check the field again. The scarecrow had moved. Not far, but far enough that I knew something was wrong. It wasn't standing in the same row anymore. I stood there staring at it across the field, a strange feeling creeping into my stomach. Because that meant someone had been out there, moving it. That night, Emily asked if we should call the sheriff. I told her it was probably nothing, just someone messing around. But the truth was, I didn't really believe that. The following evening, I went out to the field again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A narrow path through the corn. Not a tractor path. A walking path. The stalks had been pushed aside just enough for someone to move through them, and the path led deeper into the field. I followed it slowly. The corn closed in around me as I walked. Soon the barn disappeared behind the rows. Then the house disappeared too. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Then I smelled something. Smoke. A few more steps and I found it. A small clearing hidden in the center of the field. There were blankets on the ground, empty food cans, and the remains of a small fire pit. Someone had been living there, right in the middle of our cornfield. My stomach dropped, because suddenly the Scarecrow made sense. It wasn't there to scare birds. It was there to scare us. I walked back to the house as quickly as I could. When I told Emily what I found, the color drained from her face. That night, we locked every door in the house. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound outside, a faint scraping noise, like wood dragging across dirt. It moved slowly across the yard, closer to the house. Then it stopped. Emily was awake beside me. I could feel her hand gripping my arm. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We just listened. Eventually, the sound faded, and the night went quiet again. When the sun came up the next morning, I walked outside to check the yard. The Scarecrow was gone from the field. For a moment, I thought whoever had been hiding out there had finally left. Then I saw it. The Scarecrow was standing in the yard, just outside the barn. The wooden post had been pushed deep into the ground, and the burlap head had been turned toward the house. Watching, I walked toward it slowly. Something was tied around the neck of the Scarecrow, a strip of cloth, with words written on it in black marker. 4 simple words. Go back to the city. I burned the Scarecrow that afternoon. I cut down part of the cornfield the next day, and eventually the clearing in the middle disappeared. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind moves through the corn, Emily and I both hear something moving out there. Slow footsteps, walking through the rows, like someone is still out there, watching the house. For a few weeks, nothing happened. The cornfield grew taller. The rows thickened until the wind moving through them sounded like waves in the dark. Emily and I tried to convince ourselves whoever had been hiding out there was gone. But the feeling never really left. Every night before bed, I checked the barn, checked the doors, checked the edge of the field, and every night the rows of corn stood there, quiet and unmoving. Then one night in late August, the dogs started barking. We don't own dogs. Our neighbors down the road do. And when they start barking like that, it usually means something is moving through the fields. Emily and I both woke up at the same time. The barking kept going. Then it stopped suddenly. A moment later, we heard footsteps outside. Not running, walking. Slow, deliberate. Across the yard. Emily grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. The footsteps moved past the side of the house, then toward the barn, then toward the cornfield, and then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I grabbed the old shotgun my dad used to keep by the back door. I told Emily to stay inside. Then I walked out toward the field. The morning air was cool and damp. The corn towered above me as I stepped between the rows. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. All I could see was green walls of corn stretching in every direction. And then I saw the clearing again. The blankets were gone. The cans were gone. But something else was there now. Another Scarecrow, standing in the middle of the clearing, This one looked different. The flannel shirt was cleaner, the burlap head was tied tighter, and the face drawn on it looked almost angry. I walked closer, slowly. The shotgun felt heavy in my hands. When I reached the Scarecrow, I noticed something nailed to the wooden post, a small piece of cardboard with the same black marker writing, "Still my field." The wind pushed through the corn around me. The stalks rustled softly, and somewhere deeper in the field, I heard movement, not far away, maybe 20 yards, something shifting through the rows. I raised the shotgun slightly. The movement stopped. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then the corn stalks parted slightly, and I saw him, a man, thin, dirty, his beard long and tangled. He was watching me from between the rows, not angry, not scared, just watching, like he'd been living there for a long time. Neither of us said anything. The wind moved through the field again. The Scarecrow creaked quietly behind me, and then the man slowly stepped backward into the corn. The stalks closed around him, and he was gone. I stood there for several minutes, waiting for him to come back. He never did. Later that week, I hired a crew to harvest the entire field early, every last row. We searched the land for days. The sheriff even came out to look around. But we never found the man. No tracks, no camp, no sign that anyone had ever been living there at all. The field is empty now, just dirt. But sometimes late at night, when the wind moves across the property, Emily and I both hear something out there. Slow footsteps, walking through rows that no longer exist. The first time I heard my wife calling from the old well, she was standing right beside me, and the voice in the well sounded exactly like her. My wife, Sarah, and I had lived on that farm for 3 years when it started. It wasn't a huge place, just under 40 acres with an old white farmhouse, a weathered red barn, 2 equipment sheds, and enough pasture land to keep us busy from sunrise to dark. We bought it because we wanted something quiet, something of our own. Most of the property was exactly what we had hoped for, but there was one place Sarah never liked: the old well. It sat behind the barn, near the far fence line, surrounded by weeds and a ring of cracked stones half buried in the dirt. Long before we bought the property, someone had sealed it with a heavy concrete cap. The previous owner told us it hadn't been used in decades. Still, Sarah avoided it whenever she could. Whenever we walked that side of the farm, she would glance toward it and move a little closer to me. I used to tease her about that, tell her it was just an old hole in the ground. Nothing more. Then one evening in early October, we were walking back from the barn together when we both heard it. A voice, soft, carried across the field by the wind.
Ethan!
We stopped. Sarah squeezed my arm.
Did you hear that?
She whispered. I nodded slowly, because the voice had sounded exactly like her, but she was standing right beside me. We both looked toward the well. The weeds around it rustled in the breeze. Then the voice came again.
Ethan, help me!
Sarah's grip tightened.
That's not me!
Her voice shook when she said it. We stood there staring at the concrete cap. The farm had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, no cattle shifting in the pasture, just the well. After a moment, the voice stopped, and the night returned to normal. The next morning, I checked the well by myself. The concrete cap hadn't moved, still sealed, still heavy enough that no one person should have been able to shift it. But the dirt around the stones had been disturbed, like something had climbed out, and then carefully smoothed the ground again. I tried to convince myself it was animals, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The voices started happening more often after that, always at night, always from the well, and always using Sarah's voice. Sometimes it called my name. Sometimes it whispered things I couldn't quite understand. Once, it laughed. That was the night Sarah started crying, because the laugh sounded like hers, but twisted, like someone who had practiced copying it, without understanding how a real human laugh works. About a week later, the voice said something new.
Ethan! Come here.
I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight. Sarah stood behind me in the doorway. Then the voice came again.
Ethan! Please!
The sound drifted across the yard from the well. Then it said something that made Sarah grab my arm.
She's not your wife.
Sarah's grip tightened around my sleeve.
Don't go near that thing.
But something about the voice made it impossible to ignore. I walked slowly across the yard. Halfway there, I stopped. The concrete cap had shifted, just slightly, enough to reveal a narrow black gap beneath it. My stomach tightened. I turned toward the barn and grabbed the revolver from the workbench drawer. By the time I returned, the wind had picked up slightly. The weeds rustled around the well. The gap beneath the concrete looked darker than it should have been. Then the voice came again, right beneath my feet.
Ethan, please.
I knelt beside the well and aimed the flashlight into the gap. The beam disappeared into darkness. Then something moved far below. I leaned closer, and that's when I heard another voice, weak, barely above a whisper.
Ethan, don't look at it.
My blood went cold, because that voice was also Sarah's. The grass shifted behind me. Slow footsteps. I turned. Sarah was standing 10 feet away, watching me. But something about her face was wrong. Her smile was too wide, too still. Her eyes reflected the flashlight in a way I had never seen before. Then it spoke.
Did you hear her?
The voice sounded exactly like my wife, but the thing standing in front of me was not Sarah. Slowly, it tilted its head, the same way Sarah sometimes did when she was confused.
You found her!
It said softly, behind me. From deep inside the well, the real Sarah screamed. I didn't think. I turned and fired the revolver. The sound exploded across the field. The thing wearing my wife's face jerked backward into the weeds. And for a moment, everything went quiet. The sheriff never found anything when they searched the property. They said Sarah must have fallen through a collapsed tunnel beneath the well. They said shock probably made me imagine the rest. But they never explained the footprints in the grass, or the blood in the weeds, or the claw marks running along the inside of the stone tunnel walls. Sarah spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. Broken ribs, severe dehydration, a concussion the doctors said she was lucky to survive. When she finally woke up fully, the first thing she asked me was if it was still outside. I asked her what she meant. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she told me what happened. She said she had stepped outside that night to bring one of the dogs in. She heard my voice calling from behind the well. At first she thought I was joking, but when she walked closer, she saw someone standing there. Someone who looked exactly like me. She said it smiled, and then the ground collapsed beneath her. The next thing she remembered was waking up in darkness. At the bottom of the well, she said there were tunnels down there, narrow ones, scraped through the dirt like something had been digging them for years. She could hear movement in those tunnels, something crawling through the soil around her. Sometimes it would stop just outside the small space where she was trapped. And she said she could hear breathing right on the other side of the dirt, waiting, listening. Eventually, she started screaming for help. That's when she heard another voice, her own, from somewhere above, calling my name, trying to lure me to the well. When she finished telling me that story, neither of us spoke for a long time, because we both understood the same thing. The voice using her words that night wasn't trying to help her. It was trying to replace her. We filled the well 2 days later. Concrete, steel mesh. Everything the contractor said would seal it permanently. The farm is quiet again now, almost peaceful. But sometimes late at night, Sarah will grab my arm in the dark and whisper my name. When I ask what's wrong, she always says the same thing. She thought she heard someone outside calling her name with my voice. Thanks for listening to Sinister Stories. If you enjoyed tonight's video, subscribe for more and share it with a horror friend. Sleep well if you can.